of us have found ourselves in relationships with people that, over time, we came to regret. It's just the reality of dating. For a man in Missouri, his relationship with a woman would not only leave him with regret, but with mental scars that would last a lifetime. His experience, if it is to be believed, seems to back up the theory of some paranormal researchers that extraterrestrials aren't only out there somewhere, but they might just be among us. This case would be investigated by Northwest Missouri State University journalism instructor and sometime paranormal investigator Jason Offit. It's a really interesting case, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. It all began in 1992. 21-year-old man that I'll call Scott P. moved with his friend from Marceline, Missouri to Columbia to look for work. Since his sister, Stephanie, was already attending the University of Missouri-Columbia at the time, they decided to live with her until they could get enough money together to get an apartment. The sister had moved with some roommates out of a sorority house and into a tiny pad. Scott and his friend, who prefers not to talk about what happened, were sleeping on some couches when Scott sparked up a relationship with one of Stephanie's more attractive roommates. Scott described her as pale-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, about 5'8", and muscular, like a gymnast. She was also intelligent about some things and kept to herself. There was something else. She was strange. Scott noticed it right away. Sometimes when he would ask her questions, she would appear not to know what he was talking about. Everyday things like sports or games, things most anybody would have even a basic knowledge of, she seemed oblivious to it. As the relationship progressed, things continued to get strange. At some point, their relationship became intimate. Scott noticed a sense of detachment from her, as if she had no emotions, and in bed she was completely unaware of what to do. Granted, there could have been other reasons for this, and he ultimately shrugged it off. Not long after, Scott was hit with the fact that this girl already had a boyfriend. He was blonde, like her, and also like her. There was something strange about him. He came over a few times to visit her, and at first Scott assumed they would come to blows over what had transpired. However, this guy seemed indifferent to the situation. After he left, the girl almost never spoke of him. Scott began to wonder about the nature of their relationship. Were they really boyfriend and girlfriend, or was there something else going on? A few weeks after this, the girl's sister came for a visit. This is when things would go from strange to downright terrifying. Scott noticed how similar they looked. They were the same height and the same build. Scott found it odd that he noticed their skin. It was clean and clear. To him, it was like they were twins, but they weren't twins. There was something weird about them, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. After some discussion, the girl and her sister had agreed to go out for the evening with Scott and his friend. The two friends were waiting around on the couch while the two sisters sat behind them, angrily whispering about something. As the argument grew more heated, the two sisters moved to another room. That's when Scott and his friend heard something that sent a chill up their spine. All of a sudden, it got really loud. Right as we were thinking about getting up and investigating, we heard their language switch over. Noises, high-pitched and crackling, came from the girls in the other room. What we heard was something out of a Star Wars movie. If it was a language, which I'm sure it was because they were speaking to each other, it sounded like insects or something, Scott told Offit. Scott and his friend sat in stunned silence in front of the TV, almost too afraid to move. Scott likened it to going into a type of shock. Our bodies just shut down. I'm not sure how much time went by, but I remember getting myself together and walking out on the balcony. I just stood there and I couldn't think. I was still in shock. I was trying to catch my breath. He was shortly joined by his friend. Scott looked over at him and asked, "Did you just hear what I heard?" He said, "Let's go for a walk." They left the apartment and wandered over to a nearby sand volleyball pit. They sat discussing what they had heard, even trying to mimic the sounds the girls made, but they couldn't. To this day, Scott has never been able to reproduce what he heard that night. Scott wondered if it could have been a prank pulled on him by the boyfriend and his sisters, although he doubted that. Scott and the friend knew what they heard wasn't a prank. They were suddenly hit with a realization that maybe, just maybe, they were party to something they shouldn't have been. Maybe they heard something that somebody didn't want them to hear. Terrified, Scott and his friend decided to return to the apartment. Even though they sensed they might be in danger, they were hoping to play it off as though they never heard them. When they returned to the apartment, the sisters were sitting quietly on the couch. Girls asked them, where had they gone? Scott can't recall what he said back. In fact, he can't remember much of anything after that point. Aside from a vague memory of talking to them, everything beyond that is completely blank. Scott's friend also has a similar vague recollection of what transpired that evening. To date, neither of them can recall what truly happened after they entered the apartment, and that terrified them. Scott's friend refuses to discuss the matter to this day. Needless to say, Scott and his friend gave the girl a wide berth after that. The two would remain quiet about the incident for 15 years. Scott eventually opened up to his sister Stephanie about the bizarre evening and the roommate. Stephanie acknowledged that she too thought there was something strange about the girl at the time. "I always thought something was strange. Something about that girl didn't make any sense," she told them. As the years went by, Scott and his friend began exploring ufology in their search for answers. Certainly nothing in mainstream science could explain what happened that night. They discovered that some people who claimed to have been abducted were encountering human-looking beings nicknamed by some UFO researchers the Nordics during these events. The Nordics, similar to humans, except often more taller, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and an excellent physical condition, are the most often described beings aside from the Greys, cited by witnesses. Even Travis Walton claims to have encountered these entities during his abduction from the forests of Arizona. For Scott and his friend, they are convinced that the two girls they spent time with that night were human, and they are terrified about what occurred in that space of time they can't remember. There's no doubt in my mind that those girls were from a different planet. It was a life-altering thing, Scott said. I guess the question remains, are aliens walking among us? Many UFO researchers believe that they just might be. While believers and non-believers debate on whether or not extraterrestrial entities are among us, at least one woman might have the photographic evidence to back this up. In 2015, Olesya Podgorikov, who lives in the city of Kurgan in south-central Russia's Kurgan Oblast region, was on a flight traveling on a business trip when she decided to, almost on a whim, snap off a selfie with her cell phone. Looking back, she wasn't entirely sure what compelled her to take the photo, as it was not something she would usually do. She posted the picture online and was almost immediately flooded with comments alerting her to something strange a few seats behind her. The vast majority of the comments insisted that the being behind her was an alien, and indeed the entity does resemble a typical alien gray. I uploaded the picture on my social media page, and then all the questions and comments hit me. It was only after that I realized there was a bizarre looking image of a creature behind me, she said. A ray of lights can be seen going through its head. There are no signs of eyes on the photo, just a one-piece dark green body, Alicia said. Other people commented that the entity, if real, was most likely a ghost, not an alien, but Alicia is unsure either way. The size of the mysterious passenger seems larger than the other travelers. Victor Lunev, an aviation expert, commented on the photo saying, "Pilots and stewards are very superstitious, and maybe there's a reason. In my experience, I have never encountered anything of that kind." If one is to believe that Alicia's picture is legitimate and the strange-looking entity lingering a few seats behind her is an actual extraterrestrial being, then what is it doing there? Why did it allow itself to be photographed? Regardless of what is going on in the image, it is certainly creepy.